very much. Thank you. Um, I think this discussion is very important throughout the whole conference because at first sight, it looks a bit theoretical. But we actually learning now that history is not just something that is stays on pages of the books. History has dramatic effect on what is happening today. And I think that's the whole idea of history being used by dictators to justify their criminal acts now could not be better demonstrated by the transformation of Putin's Russia from authoritarian regime into the open fascist dictatorship that utilized the worst practices of the past. Actually, it's not even clear whether we should connect Putin's regime only to Bolshevik dictatorship, because it has components that have been taken from dictators, strongmen, and tyrants from all over history. So I would say that Putin's regime has genetic traits, the worst genetic traits from every period of Russian history. You can find every element, from the cruelty of the Golden Horde, the Byzantine messianic approach, of course, the Tsar's repressions against any kind of dissent, and no doubt it's the imperialist concept of ever-expanding Russia, and Bolsheviks, communists as well, so with KGB, and even the criminal component, which unfortunately was also a part of Russian subculture. So you bring everything together, and you have this monstrous regime that is carrying now this genocidal war in Ukraine. And one of the very important elements of this propaganda that is very relevant for our conversation today was the myth about World War II. And I think that's I wouldn't say European fault, American fault, but it's our fault of our generation and generation before us, but especially our generation, that after collapse of the Soviet Union, we were not persistent to equal the crimes of communism and fascism. And speaking to Eastern Europeans, I'm definitely have very eager audience to embrace this concept. But in the free world, in the West, in Western Europe and America, there was very little appetite to conduct proper investigation and the tribunal after 1991. And that was one of the reasons why Putin, after Yeltsin's tumultuous years, was able to rebuild this tyrannical infrastructure. But in the center of this concept was the myth about World War II. It's about Soviet Union defeating Nazi Germany almost single-handedly. I grew up in the Soviet Union, and I read in our history textbooks about American Lend-Lease and about the role of allies. Yeah, it was there, though they tried to diminish it. I read other books as well that were not available in the Soviet public library, so that's why I knew that without American Lend-Lease and without Britain fighting also from 1939 against Germany, Soviet Union would not have survived one-on-one against Nazi Germany. But while the role of allies had been greatly underestimated in the Soviet past, today, I bet you that many Russians probably don't even know that Soviet Union had allies. Some of them probably would believe that Soviet Union fought against the entire world. And that was very much the concept of Putin's propaganda. It's in Russian, they say, "Можем повторить," we can repeat it, which is dramatically different from Europeans' never again. Think for a moment, never again, and we can repeat it. And what's happening today in Ukraine is a repetition, but Putin's Russia is playing the role of Nazi Germany. And again, it brings us back to the point. We have to go through this painful but necessary process of condemning the crimes of communism and making it equal to the crimes of Nazis. Communism brought endless sufferings for people around the world, especially in Eastern Europe. And now we could see that our unwillingness, our complacency to deal with this criminal past created a monster that is threatening our civilization. The war in Ukraine is a demonstration that we have not learned enough from history. When you go back to the books, to the history books, and read about 1930s, I was always, as a kid, was wondering why didn't they stop Hitler, in 1933, 1934, 1935? At the end of the day, in 1925, when Mein Kampf was published, Adolf Hitler described his game plan. You cannot blame him for being very, secretive. But in 1925, Adolf Hitler was a leader of a very small, nationalistic, very loud party that tried a coup in Bavaria, failed. He just left jail, after being pardoned. But nobody took him seriously. But when he took over the power, so every year he did something that made him even more and more monstrous. Now, difference is that when Vladimir Putin repeatedly said the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of 20th century, repeatedly said, he was already president of Russia. He was already in charge of the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and had access to more cash than any other human throughout our history. And he was not shy to use this money and his power to fulfill his goals. And again, these goals were not secretive. It's quite a paradox that dictators, they always lie about what they have done. But very often they're telling us exactly what they're going to do. I mean, we can blame Putin for many crimes, and rightly so. But again, he was not hiding his grandiose concept of rebuilding Russian empire. He was basically has been telling us, and his propaganda has not been hiding his intentions to move westward, crushing Ukrainian democracy, destroying Ukrainian statehood, amalgamating Ukrainian nations back into Russia, because he believed that there was no such a thing as Ukrainian nation. And it's not something that he kept for himself. Since the annexation of Crimea, which was not responded properly by the free world, for 8 years, Putin's propaganda kept talking about next step of destroying Ukrainian statehood and dissolving Ukrainian nation. And the response from the free world, it's domestic propaganda. It's something that you will never do because we have such a great business. For 16 years, Angela Merkel government kept convincing us that Vladimir Putin would never ruin great business connections that have been built. Obama administration desperately tried to have understanding with Putin, offering reset policy, being flexible, ignoring Putin's client Bashar al-Assad, using chemical weapons, and again, doing absolutely nothing after the annexation of Crimea. So since 2014, until the beginning of this phase of the war on February 24th this year, politicians on both sides of the Atlantic kept telling us, sanctions on Russia could be so damaging for the global economy. Now, in 8 months, they did so much that they have been agitating against for 8 years. So it was doable. And even a small portion of what had been done in the last 8 months could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives now and saved Ukraine from destruction. Now, moving to the concrete situation now and what can be done. Naturally, there's only one way to end this horror. It's to Ukraine to win. There's no other option. And I'm despised by those who are still advocating for so-called negotiated outcome, while Vladimir Putin keeps committing crimes against humanity and genocide as we speak now. And what makes things worse, that unlike the crimes of Nazi Germany, or unlike other genocides that have been committed in Cambodia in the 70s, or in Rwanda in 1994, or war in former Yugoslavia. These days, we can actually see it online. Just think about it. We are witnessing it online, and we're still, having this debate whether Ukraine has to make concessions. Hell with this. Concessions is not just territory. I mean, all these people who are talking about concessions, maybe we can have a peace, by Ukraine agreeing to cede some of its land. They forget that land is not, it's not a part of a board game. People live there. And we know what happens to people who live under Russian occupation. So it's our duty to do everything for Ukraine to win the war, and for Russian troops being decisively defeated. And speaking about history again, it's time to actually make sure that this war will be the last war of Russian empire. Anything less will be our failure, and it can be done. It's not that it's this war cannot be won. Ukraine proved it can succeed on the battlefield, and we have to provide everything for them to win. And that's, by the way, offers a great chance for Russia. I think that is the only way for Russia to move into the right direction. Is a total collapse of Putin's armies in Ukraine. We have to go throughout 1945. But those who are arguing, saying, if Russia is defeated, we can have the same kind of nostalgia, comparing it to Germany in 1918. No. That's absolutely wrong historical parallel. In 1918, Russia 1918 was in 1991. The failure and unwillingness to actually end imperial design of Russia led to what's the tragedy that is happening today. And only going through 1945. When I say it's not about Russia being bombed to the ruins as Germany, but it's about psychological defeat. The only way for Russian people to become more fond of Europe, and I can see sunlight in my face. Just, wait a second. We can cure the problems of nature, definitely, by putting shadows down. So the only way for Russian people to get fond of democracy is what I call democracy by default. And that should come after Ukraine wins and liberates the entire country, including Crimea. Ukrainian flag raised in Sevastopol is the best way to start liberation of Russia from Putin's fascism. Again, not because overnight Russian people will become, fond of democratic institutions, but because the choice will be very simple. After the collapse of Putin's armies and the geopolitical defeat of Russian empire, the choice will be either become Chinese satellite or trying to find an understanding with Europe and to become part of the family of the civilized nations. It's a chance. There's no guarantee it will happen, and most likely, if it does, it will be Russia with that will be smaller on the map, with some of the territories like Chechnya, Dagestan, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, you name it, trying to do something on their own. Fine. In 1991, we thought that communism was the main problem, and throwing it away, we could build a free democratic Russia. Now we understood it was a mistake. It was an imperial design in the bottom. Communism was a cover-up. So that's why we have to finish this war in Ukraine with the end of this curse, was what I call is to remove this imperial virus from the body of Russian statehood. And then we have a chance. And it's time now to start thinking how we're going to build this new Europe with new European infrastructure, security infrastructure, new world. Because the collapse of Putin's regime will mean chaos in Russia, but also great opportunities for freedom fighters around the world. from North Korea to Nicaragua, from Belarus to Zimbabwe, we will see new energy, spirit of freedom that will move people to the streets and will make dictators tremble. So that's within a limited period of time. So that's how I see the connections between the current war and tragedy happening in Ukraine and the historical perspectives. And again, finishing my short presentation with what I said in the beginning is history is a living thing. And us ignoring it or us believing it's only for historians to debate, it leads to tragedies that we have to deal with now.